Welcome to Rick on Life, brought to you by the Liberty Beacon Media Project. I'm your host, Rick Amitin, and this is where we love to talk about things that impact our lives. Today, we're going to be talking about how to effectively apologize with Ford Taylor. Ford is the husband of one wife. He's the father of three daughters. He's the co-author of the book, The Hike. He is a worldwide sought-after business trainer, a professional coach, and the founder of Transformational Leadership. Ford, welcome back to Rick on Life.
Hey, Rick, thank you for having me back. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
Good to see you. You just got back from a trip to Africa. Take a minute and tell us about that.
I was in South Africa for about 2.5 weeks. During the first part of it, we did 3 different transformational leadership trainings in 3 different cities. Met with a couple of businesses. Had some great meetings with a group over there called Unashamedly Ethical. You might want to talk to them sometime. It's really a cool program. And then ended up at a 4-day conference. Actually, it was 5. I couldn't stay for all of it. With the European Economic Summit, where they brought leaders in from all over the world to talk about, how to impact Africa in a positive way. And they made TL, a part of that. So,
that's fantastic. Sounds like a wonderful trip.
It was.
I'm sure you accomplished some really good things over there.
It was a great trip, as you can probably tell by my voice. On the trip home, they canceled my flight home, so I had to reroute, and it took a lot longer getting home. So I brought back this little gift with me that I developed on the way home called a sinus infection.
Yeah.
So other than that, it was a great trip.
Hope you're feeling better here, maybe even while we're talking.
Thank you.
Ford, in a recent conversation that I had, we were discussing domestic violence. And I think generally when we talk about domestic violence, we tend to see that in the home, in the family setting, between couples who are having an issue and not getting along. But one of the things that is troubling me about where we are nationally right now is I think we're seeing domestic violence play out in the public square on a national basis. Because it's not just physical violence, but it's also verbal abuse. And we've lost our ability, it seems, for the moment here to dialogue. And we're not talking with one another anymore. Everything's been reduced to monologue. And we're not only not willing to hear what the other person, the opposing view might be, or a differing view might be, we're not even willing at the moment to let differing views talk. And so I think we're going to have to find a way in order to correct our course. We're going to have to find a way to apologize for our behavior to one another and set back down and start actually communicating with each other. Is that just me, or do you have a sense about that?
No, Rick, I absolutely agree with you. Somehow over history, we found ourselves in a place now of where our leaders have come to care more about how people see them or what they look like or sound like than they care about the people that follow them. And when you reach that point, you say and do things out of anger, out of insecurity, that maybe you wish you hadn't said and done. But once you've said and done them, you can't unsay them. You can't undo them. However, you can close the gap on the mistake that you made. But if we aren't willing to humble ourselves and admit that we make the mistakes, it's very hard to get 2 opposing views to even come to the table, and near impossible to get them to stay at the table.
Yeah, and for me, I think this is history repeating itself. I think we are subjecting ourselves to the perils of ignoring lessons from the past. And where, historically in our country, we've had one group of people violating the rights of another group of people. And those people who were wronged not only deserved an apology, but they deserved the wrong to be corrected. And right now, by the current data that's available, 70% of this country feels like they belong in a victim class. So we've got everybody violating, at least perceived from a perception standpoint, violating the rights of almost everybody else. And so everybody is feeling violated, offended, like they're not getting their just due. And it's really evolved to a level that, it's almost out of control, if in fact it's not out of control.
Yeah, Rick, you're right. I don't know if this is good news or bad news, but a couple of things. The bad news is this is happening worldwide. As you know, I travel to other countries, and this is consistent around the world. The good news is that change seldom occurs until the pain of staying the same exceeds the pain of change. And when you got 70% of your country feeling as if they're a victim, we're probably getting dangerously close to the pain of staying the same exceeding the pain of change. And, a lot of people talk about that experience is the best teacher. I don't agree with that. I believe that the consequences from the experience are the best teacher. And so we are now suffering the consequences in our country from the experience, even from the past, that it didn't seem like we learned enough from. And so I think as we move forward, the people of America, I believe will stand up and say we've had enough and we were not going to accept this behavior anymore in a good way. I don't think it'll be civil war or anything, at least I hope not. But I think the people of America, as you know, I believe that everybody out there is smart, gifted, or talented in at least one area and many in multiple areas. I believe 95 to 98% of this world, deep down, have huge hearts. They truly do care about other people. And if we can get those minds and hearts to connect, and for people to take a deep breath and just take a step back, take responsibility for my part. I've made a lot of mistakes in these areas, but am I willing to say, I'll take responsibility for my part and not blame others for the part that I did? I think in that place we might have some hope.
Yeah, well, I have great faith in our country. I have great faith in our people, and it's a different world today than it was 25 years ago, maybe even less than that for significant change to take place. But the basis of civility to me is being able to sit down and reason with one another. And, it's a large country, it's millions of people, hundreds of millions of people. And we're not always all going to agree on our ideas and our concepts, but we do need to agree on civility and getting along, and making room, for people with differing views. And to me, the very nature of political correctness is intolerance, and we don't seem to understand that. And so I don't know, except that, I think freedom of speech is under more attack right now than we've ever seen it, but it's also under attack by the people who are doing the attacking. And we just don't understand, the nature of silencing our freedom to speak and to care and to die. We don't need to apologize for our passions. We can believe very strongly about things. What I think we're going to have to apologize for is our expressions of those passions, and how we're just not willing to get along.
Yeah, Rick, you're right. And I think maybe at the core root of some of this is we all have core beliefs, and we all have different ones. The problem with the core belief is that a true core belief, a lot of people would die for. They would argue with the sheetrock on the wall over that core belief. When you run that core belief through the lens of our self-identities, all of a sudden things start getting messed up. Because all of our self-identities, they're connected to all of our life's experiences, comparing ourselves to others, what we think others think about us. And all of a sudden, when you have a low self-identity and two core beliefs crashing up against one another, something gets released in our system. And it's because we're afraid, we're in pain. There's all kinds of things. It could be
Angry.
frustration, but those three things lead us to anger. And when that anger kicks in, there's a chemical in our body called epinephrine. It's an adrenaline, norepinephrine and epinephrine. And when that kicks in, it actually reduces, if you will, the size of our rational brain. And when that goes on, we say and do things that we look back on and say, why would I ever do that? Well, we do it because our brains aren't rational when that epinephrine kicks in. And if we don't find a way to, at least at minimum, respect the fact that others do have different core beliefs and be okay with that. We don't have to agree with their core belief. We just got to be okay with the fact that it's different. Right. And if we have all our stuff bound up in all of our own self-identities and we take on something bigger than ourselves, then the anger doesn't kick in. And if the anger doesn't kick in, our brains stay bigger. And if our brains are rational and we're at the table, even two opposing views can come up with great solutions because they're working with their full brains. But most of the time, people get angry and they're operating with maybe 5 or 10% of their brain. And it's hard to come to resolution when you've only got that much capacity going on in a room.
Well, Ford, let's get to the subject of apologizing, and I love what you've done with this subject. We mentioned in a previous show that you have this material that's all available. You teach it all over the world, but it's also available on demand. I've gone through the material myself and was absolutely blown away with how simple it was, but also the wisdom in which it was constructed. And I laugh. I've got another buddy. You and I have a mutual friend, and we were talking and laughing about the fact that wisdom turns out to be so simple, and it's how we complicate our lives. Without wisdom is the problem. And so your material is very hands-on, nuts and bolts, practical. You can use it. It's not pie in the sky. It's not pop psychology. It's actually, you can use this to enhance your life, your personal life, your family life, your professional life. It's all there. So I'm not sure where you want to start, but who needs to apologize? How do we need to apologize? And what's all that look like?
Well, Rick, the neat part about that material and this apology, just for fun, just quickly, if people happen to believe in the Bible, it says to pray for wisdom. God says to ask for it. It then says humility precedes wisdom, and then it says honor and glory come after wisdom. And there's 3 different words used for wisdom, and I'm not going to get into all 3 of them, but most people are looking for the third one, which is really complicated. They're not looking for the simplicity wisdom, which is, when you got a brain the size of mine, you pretty much have to go with the simple. Therefore, it makes it a lot easier to make it simple for other people. So it's interesting how that works. But, when we really do take responsibility for our own behavior, it's amazing how much freer we get from the bondage that we can be held in. And I share with people that, when you forgive others, you're the winner. You're the one that benefits by showing forgiveness. Now they win too, but you're the big winner. And so this 6-step apology that we call it means that we're taking responsibility for what we do. So let's just say, Rick, that somehow maybe today I blow it on the show, okay, and I do something wrong, and you probably wouldn't embarrass me on the show, but you call me later and say, Ford, when you said these things, I'm not sure that it was really good. And so the first thing we teach about this apology, number 1, is how do you go to someone first to let them know that they've even done something wrong? So that really the first part of an apology is even knowing that you did something wrong. And so we teach, if you go to someone to let them know that maybe they've broken the relationship or they've hurt you, that if you go in humility, which means I might be wrong, You go in pre-forgiveness. In other words, I'm not there to hurt you. I'm there to restore the relationship. You go in love, and my definition of love in this case is I care more about you than I do how you feel about me. In other words, I'm going to come just in case I'm right. So Rick, if I came to you, I might be wrong. Maybe no one's ever said this to you before, but I care enough about you that if I'm right and what you're doing is impacting your relationships with your spouse or your children, I love you enough to come take the chance and then to give 100% of the truth, because sometimes the facts and the truth are not the same.
Right.
But when we go to that point, if we're wrong, and I tell people, I do not recommend apologizing for something that you didn't do. Because when you do that, you end up leaving the other person seeing you exactly like they saw you, and they stay in their muck. But if you're wrong, step number one is to state what you did. I call it state the offense. So if you called me and said, hey, on the show, you said this, you may not have realized it, but look what happened. And if you're right, I'm going to go, wow, Rick, thank you for bringing this up. I did say that, and I would state it back to you. Step number two is I would say, I was wrong. Step number three, I would tell you I am sorry. And we're very careful when we teach this to let people know two things. Number one, you don't say, I want to tell you I'm sorry, or I want to apologize. That's not an apology. That's a desire to want to, but you can't quite do it. So that's number one. Number two, if you were raised in a home that you were told you're a sorry little son of a gun, and saying the words, I am sorry, is hard for you because it has a different meaning than what I'm talking about, just change that to, I apologize. And step number four is, will you forgive me? Or when you can, will you forgive me? And the reason I add the when you can, sometimes if we truly do want to change, we might have said, I'm sorry, and might have even asked for forgiveness, but we might have done it just to get the conversation over with. But if we really are going to try to make a change in our behavior, to say, when you can, will you forgive me? It gives the other person a little bit of space. Now, once you ask for forgiveness, you've done your part. It's now in their court. But step number five is, and Rick, I give you permission to hold me accountable to never do anything like that on your show again. So I'm going to give you permission to change my behavior. I'm not holding you accountable for me to change, but I'm giving you permission to bring it up if I do it again. And then number six, just to be sure, is there anything else that I might have done that you've not made me aware of, in case there's something else I need to apologize for? And when you go through those 6 steps and you're sincere about it, it's amazing what it does to the relationship with the person that you apologize to.
Yeah, it's very powerful. I mean, I looked at that when I went through the material. I actually went back through it, I think probably at least 3 times. And I thought of the power that exists from these steps that don't exist when you approach it from that, I feel like I should apologize, or if I did anything wrong, which is just another way of saying I don't think I did anything wrong, but if you think I did, let's get this over. But there was, to me, I captured the impact of actually wanting to make things better. That there's that purpose of not just getting beyond something uncomfortable, but actually creating a change in the environment and the relationship.
Absolutely, Rick. And I agree with one of the things you said, and I'm going to add one to it. If you have to put an if in front of your apology, it won't matter if you use the 6 step or a 1 step. It's pretty much useless. And if you have to put a but after it, you've pretty much undone the apology.
Right.
What I found is that when you go through these 6 steps and make no excuses at all, it's not unusual that the other person will say, are you okay? Is everything okay? I mean, they'll actually ask you to tell them what happened that would cause you to have done that. And so let's just say, for example, I messed up on the show today. What if somehow it might have been connected to taking some medicine or something that I was taking that might have had me a little out of whack? Well, I wouldn't say that in the apology. I would just do the 6 steps. And odds are you would say, Ford, that wasn't like you. Are you okay? Which would now open the door for me to say, really, I wasn't. I was a little bit irritable because of some medicine I was taking. And all of a sudden, now the relationship is even further restored because you cared enough to want to know, was there something else going on? And so it's amazing how well this tool works.
There's something that I came across when I was recently studying about training for police officers. And they teach a principle, especially when they're going out on calls. And one of the cause that gives them the great concern or alarm is when they're called out on a domestic dispute. They just don't know what they're walking into, how inflamed those emotions are. And so they are taught the principle that's nicknamed Q-tip, which means to quit taking it personal. Mm-hmm. And I thought was a marvelous de-stressor. And what you're reflecting on right now is apologizing to somebody who then could turn around and say, I know that wasn't like you, Ford. So I was caught off guard by it. Obviously that person didn't take it so personal. And I think if we would apply that principle in our relationships and in our understanding about the other person, I just think it would go a long ways to de-stress and take some of the tension out of these relationships.
Yeah, you're right, Rick. Another thing I want to throw on the sixth step, and then I want to respond to this little conversation we're having now, is if someone asks you to forgive them, don't take that gift away by saying, oh, it's okay, don't worry about it. Just say, of course, I forgive you. In other words, don't, out of your discomfort, take the gift out of their lives by saying, oh, it wasn't that bad, please don't worry, because that doesn't help them. It doesn't make them feel any better. Say, of course, I forgive you. But you're right, if we can remove those stress points, it's amazing what can happen relationally every step of the way. Because all of us have a story. We all have things that have happened to us that have been great, and we all have things that have happened that have not been good. As you know, I was sexually abused by a female school teacher at a very young age, which sent me down a path. But what happens later in life when some of the things that have happened to us, when we see those again, our brains can't process it. Just things that resemble the same thing because they're stored in a part of our brain called the hippocampus. And our hippocampus is there to protect us. And so if something happened to us earlier in life that we see later that resembles what happened, or it could even be a lot of stories that we've heard that resemble what happened because they come with passion or emotion plus purpose. Later, when it happens again, our brains can't process it. They immediately jump to the conclusion that we're going to get the same outcome. And so what I share with people, if someone is having a bad day, or like what you talked about a while ago, my first thought is there's always one more thing in somebody's hippocampus that I know nothing about. And so they could be responding even by the color of the shirt I have on. And if we can stay in that place, fear, frustration, and pain don't kick in. We don't take it personally. And if we don't, the epinephrine doesn't kick in. If the epinephrine doesn't kick in, our brain stays rational. Now our emotional and rational self can work together, and we can get through just about anything.
Yeah, I loved your point about there's always one more thing to know about somebody. And, there's certain personalities out there like yourself who are really working hard to bring a sense of understanding and compassion even to the workplace, large corporations, other groups of people, but it goes right down to the individual. I mean, the dynamics don't change. And if we, sometimes we love has got so many different meanings and applications that you think maybe it shouldn't actually show up in a business environment. But compassion, I think, is easy to understand. Even in a team building, a corporate environment, whatever the group is, as well as our individual relationships. So we can just get a sense of compassion for ourselves and others, I think it makes it so much easier to correct behaviors, understand each other, not take things so personal and build up these layers of offenses, and actually apologizing the way that you are constructing an apology, I think goes a long ways toward making everything better.
Yeah. Rick, what you just said is so well said. Even when I use the word love in a corporate or non-one-on, personal environment, if you'll notice, I even give it the definition. The definition is that I care more about you than
Right.
how you feel about me, because you're right. There's 4 different words for love, even in this other book we're talking about. And so we have to be careful how we use that word. But if I'm more compassionate about you, in other words, if I care about you and your other relationships, I always found it interesting that we're told don't work with your friends and family. I just think that's hilarious. It's like, okay, let's all go work with our enemies. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense. And so even if they're not friends and family when we start, they ought to be, shortly after we get into the workplace together. But because we believe some of those things that have been said and said over and over again that just don't make sense. And we got to move past some of those old sayings too to really make a difference.
Well, basically, the needs that we have are universal. We all want a sense of belonging. Our tendencies to be tribal go very, very deep, from a historical factor. And we have that sense, but we also want significance. And I think sometimes we think of significance only comes through great achievements. But I also think that significance comes from the problems that we solve. And I think it's a great message when you're approaching someone to apologize to them, or someone is approaching you because that they were hurt by something you did or said. I think it's such a great opportunity for you to be significant and solve the problem, because I think solving problems is overlooked, as significant.
You're 100% correct. I absolutely agree with what you said, because as problem solvers, that's what, basically a lot of people break the world down into a number of spheres or cultural influences. And I happen to break it down this way. An organization is any time 2 or more people are in relationship. That could be a husband and wife, a marriage, a huge corporation, even a city, but 2 or more in relationship. And if we have influence with at least one person, that makes us a leader. Well, if you can take that definition and funnel what you just said through that definition, so even if it's one of those major cultural influences like the business, the church, arts, entertainment, media, family, government, education, or if it's a marriage, I mean, if it's a relationship with a parent and a child, I'm with you. I think one of the biggest problems in our world is that we've turned into a fatherlessness world. I mean,
Right.
people are looking for a mother or a father. They're looking for someone who cares more about them than they care about themselves. And so no matter what cultural sphere we're talking about, whether it's a couple, a family, a big company, a big church, a citywide, we have to get to a place where we have compassion and we care about others. I know this, people don't want to hear this, but even more than we do ourselves.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept, but you really can't strike out at other people without realizing deep down you're striking out at yourself. We're all interconnected here, and so a lot of times we're just missing the skill set, to resolve things.
Sorry.
And I think this apology, the 6-step apology, I think goes a long ways. I mean, I hope people listening will take it serious, write it down, maybe go to the website, and study it out, put it in context with the other material that you're teaching. But I mean, this is so helpful, and it's so needed. Um, and so it's not just about appeasing anything. It's about actually having the relationships that are meaningful and valuable in our lives. And even in a working environment, you spend so much time with those people around you. Um, you should make them a family. I agree. You should feel that same, connection. I mean, it's not going to be, at that, that maybe that intimate level, but you can certainly include them in your sphere of compassion and understanding, bless you, and wanting the best for them. You know what I mean? For it, I want to tell people how to get a hold of you, and that is on tlondemand.com. If people want to visit your site, and they can go there, they can look it all over, and there's a place for them to sign up if they want to subscribe to the actual training material. There's a cost involved, but you have been so generous to offer a code, a 20% discount for all of our listeners and viewers who may want to check this out. But if you go to tlondemand.com, if you decide to sign up, there's a place for a code. If you will put in the code box JFT20, it will calculate a 20% discount for you on the program. Ford, thank you so much for taking the time again to be with us. Let me take a second here and see if there's anything that you want to say before we close the subject here on apologizing.
Yeah, just a quick message for men who are married. That sixth step, is there anything else? The first time you do this, I might not ask that sixth question to my wife unless you're ready to really listen and hear, but wait until you're ready, because all the stuff that you did in the second grade and the fifth grade and junior high and high school and college and 25 years ago and last week, I mean, it's just the way their brain works. They remember all of it, and you probably don't remember what you did last week. And so when you're ready to ask that question, just, get a pen out, listen. They're sharing with you how they feel. And if you can do that, you'll be amazed, I mean, in a good way, what could happen in your marriage. But don't ask it until you're ready, because if you're going to take it personally, you're going to get offended again. You're going to lash out, and you're going to have to do another sixth step for doing that. So be ready with specifically your spouse before you ask that sixth question. And the second thing, just quickly, Rick, if people do sign up for TL On Demand, if they go in and they sign up for TL, that gets them what we call our plain glass version of TL. If they sign up under what's called TL Alumnus, they can get the plain glass and the stained glass. They can get the basic training along with the spiritual undergirding of that training if they're interested.
Well, thank you for it. And I will just quickly say here, your spouse occupies a different place in your life than anybody else does. And it requires, the additional understanding, the additional commitment, and you have to factor in things with your wife that don't exist with anybody else. And so it's very, very good advice for you to, to help us realize. And I hope that men get to the point when they are ready. They're ready to ask that question, and then have the courage to accept responsibility for that. And you and I have, been in situations in our marriages where we had to confront things. And I can, I'm like you. I have benefited greatly from doing whatever I had to do to get to the point when that love, intimacy could flow freely. And so I would apologize and apologize and apologize, because it's worth it, to get to that point. Of course, part of apologizing from an adult perspective is you stop doing some of the things you're having to apologize for, so you don't continue to make the same mistakes.
That's correct. And the neat thing about this six-step apology, even though it's the right thing to do from the heart, like you said a while ago, a lot of the things we teach are practical. Let's just look at the practicality of it. If you have an area in your life you want to change with the relationship, how many times do you want to have to say I was wrong? How many times do you have to say you can hold me accountable? Right. I mean, just pure practicality. This particular apology will cause us to change quicker not just change, but to turn from that old behavior much faster. Just practically, we get tired of saying I'm wrong, and you
Right.
can hold me accountable.
Right. Yeah, very, very good stuff. I think you've really helped us out today, Ford. I appreciate you taking the time to be with us, and I really hope people take a close look at this. You know, I've gone through. I mentioned this before, but I don't know how many trainings, seminars, personal development stuff I've gone through over my course of my lifetime. I've never found any better material than what you've put together, and I just think it's so helpful. I want the world to go through it. I really think we could go a long ways here to making the world a better place if people would take a look at the material that you've put together. You're already teaching it all over the world. I'd like our country. If I had the way, I'd pay for everybody to go through your training. I think it's that valuable. I think it would have that kind of an impact on our society. So thanks again, Ford, for being with us. Thanks for joining us. I'd love to hear from you. You can write to me with your thoughts, comments, or any questions at rickonlife@gmail.com. I'm your host, Rick Amitin, and remember, whatever's going on in your life, just sprinkle a little love on it. See you next time.